Okay, everybody, welcome to the stream. I'm just going to check my audio very briefly, and then we'll be underway. Well, see, we have a few viewers here anyway. It's pretty good. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, everything looks good. Thanks for that, lads. Okay. I'll answer a few chats afterwards, actually, but yeah, tonight we have an interesting stream. So last time out, we talked about this thing called the Open Government Partnership, and this was an interesting kind of dig into kind of how this kind of emerged out of British and American uh, kind of development policy, really. Um, and we discussed basically what this graph here kind of explains. So we talked about this, how Obama launched this thing at the UN and everything. And we talked about some of the people involved, like Samantha Power, and tonight we're going to talk about this woman here, Beth Simone Novak, who was the CTO for Open Government. We'll talk a lot about her. We talked about Cass Sunstein, and we talked about Jeremy Weinstein, and we talked about this a series of departments that were set up, and we talked basically then how it kind of drew on this earlier initiative called the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, and that was all to do with all this combination of governmental and civil society power, basically. And we talked a lot about the Blair era. So there was this kind of collaborative kind of thing going on between Blair in Britain and the kind of democratic establishment in America. And tonight we're going to basically build on that. We're going to build on that analysis, and we're going to basically take it into the area of this idea of soft power, basically the idea of a form of power which is not really about weaponry or war or economic power. It's just more about your kind of clout as a culture, to influence initiatives, to bring people along, and this will feed into a lot of this open government thing. So we're going to take it all the way up to Ireland joining this initiative, and we dug out some really interesting stuff, really. So we'll just start off here. This is kind of an explanation, really, of what this open government thing is, just to kind of recap. So participation in the open government partnership basically means engagement and political will. It means sharing responsibilities with civil society in the elaboration and in the implementation of important public policies and reforms. It means sharing the decision making process from the outset. So we talked about this thing about how it's all 50-50. It's 50-50 government and 50-50 civil society. And that basically means NGOs. And if you don't follow my stuff, I'm majorly interested in NGOs and in how they operate to kind of they take the place of the public. They basically are supposed to be the representation of the public will uh, in these kinds of stakeholder situations, these stakeholder governmental situations and collaborative situations. And people will say, well, that's civil society. People have their say. Well, I'm actually, I'm a bit of a critic of that because, as we all know, NGOs basically are special interest groups. They're more accurately described as special interest groups, and people create NGOs to do all kinds of things. And the progressives and what you would call the left or the liberals, basically, they're very effective at organizing themselves in an institutional way to drive social change. And tonight's stream will be all about social change, and we're going to talk about some really interesting figures, and they're really important figures. We'll be talking about Jeff Mulgan, for example, and as part of the Blair era, and actually describing some of his influence and he's a great example of how progressives actually see the world. So we're going to talk about the themes of soft power. We're going to talk about the idea that this isn't really communism. It's actually something far more related to the kind of ideas I've been exploring in my own kind of education project for the last year or so. And we're going to take it into a more nuanced kind of area. I mean, we're going to extract a lot of really interesting things from this. So the Open Government Partnership is not simply a new group of countries sharing information about past actions, nor simply a response to difficult economic times. And remember, this is all being done in the shadow of the great financial crash of 2008. We are building here mechanisms to strengthen democracy, new ways to engage with civil society, and new partnerships to address old challenges of governance. And if you look at Irish society since the great financial crash, basically, we have become essentially an NGO society. And NGOs were also granted, maybe talk about this in another stream, NGOs have obtained a lot more power uh, following the great financial crash, you know. And tonight's component, when we'll come to Ireland later on, you're going to see how the that government, that Fine Gael Labour government again of the post Troika era, was instrumental in making all this happen and in aligning this kind of civil society coalition. So this next document here, this is a quick timeline of some of the stuff we're going to get into tonight, basically. So I'm calling this timeline of the open government, open data movement. So we're going to talk about this whole idea of an open internet, open information, getting our data into accessible formats, making the government more transparent. A lot of this stuff I would agree with. You know, a lot of these things are very much things that I would agree with. I think a lot of us would share this idea that the internet has to be free, it has to be open to people. We're into free speech. But as we're going to see, this kind of stuff has kind of left the room now, and we've gone into the censorship era since the kind of Trump time, you know. But basically, we're going to talk about this period in the 90s and 2000s, and this rise of civic tech and you know, basically ways of bringing technology into governance, and that'll be where we'll introduce Tony Blair's advisor, Jeff Mulgan. We'll talk a lot about him. We'll talk about this thing called the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit, which was established in 2001 to drive innovative policy, including precursors to open data like public sector information reuse. And of course, Mulgan was the director of that, the founding director. We'll talk about this guy, James Crabtree. He was a senior advisor under Blair in that unit, and later to Gordon Brown. And we'll talk then about this interesting character, Tom Steinberg, who created this thing called My Society, and a whole bunch of other things actually as well. And it's all about this idea of the consumer they're trying to make it out that the consumer, the citizen, is being empowered to have greater democratic influence in their society. And this is very, very definitively a soft power thing that is being exported in this era. And now, of course, they're kind of nervous about this stuff in our current time because this kind of thing now is becoming, well, you got populism following this, and there was a major shift in direction following this. But anyway, we'll this is very important kind of analysis here. So basically, then we'll talk about this. That's the UK side of it, basically, and then there's the American side, which is what's going on the other side of the Atlantic, and you have institutions like the Sunlight Foundation. And basically, there's a kind of a bit of cross pollination going on, and you end up with there's a meeting. It's called the Sebastopol meeting. We'll talk about it basically, and they kind of come up with kind of ways of dealing with technology and bringing technology into the government to make it more efficient and to drive innovation and everything. And that is all basically brought into the Obama era, and it's brought into the whole open government idea, which was driven in the Obama era, and then it was exported through the agreement that was made in 2011, basically. Then Ireland joins then later, in a year or two later, and we'll talk about how that all came to be. So, and that's the Irish side of it there. Then, so to kind of set up the kind of table here, then what's this open data thing about? Because again, a lot of us are probably in agreement with most of these objectives, but it's how this has been kind of brought into government and brought into policy, which is very interesting to me. So this is an article, a brief history of open data. And basically, so you have big data, which focuses, let's zoom this in a little bit. So big data focuses primarily on the possibilities offered by exploiting a volume of data in exponential growth. Whereas with open data, the creation of value depends on the ability to share data, to make it available to third parties rather than on sheer volume. Open data responds to a set of technical, economic, and legal criteria. It must be freely available online under a format that allows reuse. So this was an idea that was really being driven. A lot of it was coming out of Silicon Valley. A lot of the tech companies are interested in this. And this kind of, there's a very libertarian kind of ethos in this, you know, which I would absolutely ascribe to in many respects. And so In 2007, then there was a kind of an important meeting basically, and 30 thinkers and activists of the internet held a meeting in Sebastopol, north of San Francisco. Their aim was to define the concept of open public data and have it adopted by the US presidential candidates. Among them were two well known figures, Tim O'Reilly and Lawrence Lessig. I won't talk about these two guys particularly, but they are important in the history of this movement. The first is familiar to the techies. This American author and editor is the originator of many vanguard computer and internet movements. He defined and popularized expressions such as the open source and Web 2.0. Lawrence Lessig is professor of law at Stanford University in California. He's the founder of Creative Commons licenses. You'll see that all over Wikipedia and everything, based on the idea that of copyleft and free dissemination of knowledge. All cool stuff, all things that I would aspire to. Participants of the Sebastopol meeting mostly come from the free software and culture movements. These movements are at the heart of many innovations in the field of computers and the internet over the last 15 years. Some of these innovations are now familiar. Think of the collaborative encyclopedia Wikipedia. Other open source creations are less known to the general public despite playing a fundamental role in online services. For instance, the Apache software for the servers is used to host most websites. And so we use these, all this is the architecture of the internet. And this is all very much feeding into the 2008 campaign in America. And these activists are very clear. And, and it's hard to remember, if you weren't around then, the zeitgeist feels quite different now. We're in a very different kind of cultural space now. Everything has changed quite significantly. But I remember this time, and I was very taken in by this and I still share some of these ideas, the idea of an open internet. So some activists and entrepreneurs who already used public data were attending the Sebastopol meeting too. This guy, Adrian Holovati, the founder of Everyblock, a localized information service, and Britain, Tom Steinberg, initiator of the Fix My Street website. And he did a few other things that we're going to talk about later on. And of course, one of the youngest of this group was none other than the late Aaron Swartz, inventor of the RSS and free knowledge activist. And of course, he sadly, he died not long after that, and he had a stake in Reddit and everything. And since he died, Reddit became a complete, it became what we now kind of think of it as. We think of Reddit now as this kind of censored place where you get banned for critiquing particular things or saying particular things. And so he was a genuine innovator and a genuine believer in a free and open internet. And he died in tragic circumstances. It's a very sad story. But this meeting basically was very influential, very important, and it kind of codified a number of things, about how the internet kind of should function, which we still kind of benefit from. Although there's been a huge clampdown on a lot of these ideas, there's still that kind of architecture is still in place, and it's still the open source movement. It still exists, and it's still the reason why many of us are able even to use the internet to the extent that we do. So ownership by the largest number runs quickly into the difficult question of the culture of data. Many skills from various sources are required: identifying data sources, being able of processing and handling them, exercising a critical view on the conditions of their production and of their opening, the control of basic statistical concepts. The traditional mediators, including the press and specialized associations, are beginning to make out the benefits of open data. And of course, this can feed into the citizens too, because you can get access to your government, basically. So less than 6 years after the Sebastopol meeting, the idea of open data was clearly made its way into society, and its speed of dissemination continued to challenge us, they're saying, basically, when this article was written years ago, 2013. However, the ambition of open data has also changed. The goal isn't anymore to change the world through data, but to try more modestly to modernize public action. Open data is no longer the transparency tool that its promoters had imagined. Lawrence Lessig dissociated himself as early as in 2009 from the idea of radical transparency, and of course, the Wikipedia thing as well. Other participants of the Sebastopol meeting showed their support to WikiLeaks, whose praxis is significantly different from that of open data. Researcher Beth Novak, who was very important, we're going to discuss her career in a few minutes, who took part in the creation of the open data policies of the first Obama administration, also has expressed doubts concerning the ability of open data to improve, per se, the governance of public affairs. Open data is not enough to open organizations and promote new practices of more transparent and open governance. So that's that article. That kind of sets up the kind of the way people were kind of thinking and talking about data up until about 10 years ago. And this whole kind of thing hinges on how things have changed in the meantime. And it wasn't long into the Obama administration that people got quite cynical about a lot of this. And we'll explain some of that now. So, okay, so I've put up some interesting academic sources basically to kind of draw on. Uh, yeah, and I took some notes here, which unfortunately don't highlight, but you can read them here, and I'll read them anyway. So this paper relies on Obama's own words, White House documents, and government reports to demonstrate why and how his administration sought to assert America's global leadership through the power of America's example. So this is where we get to the idea of soft power. It identifies Obama's open government and transparency agenda as a critical tool of the administration's national security strategy to address growing disillusionment with liberal democratic governance in America and elsewhere, and to counter the rising challenge to the liberal order by rival authoritarian states, China and Russia especially. So I'll be arguing here that basically Obama and his administration basically walked away from this very quickly when they started to lose control over what that data meant, and when it meant that the internet was going to be full of, people like us, that it became a problem basically. But 8 years later, in January 2017, Obama delivered his farewell address to the nation before thousands of his fellow citizens in Chicago, his adopted hometown. He evoked open government when he called upon the American people to counter mounting threats to American democracy. He identified one threat as the assault by fanatics and autocrats on the Enlightenment virtues of vigorous debate and the exercise of reason and scientific inquiry. These virtues, he stated, are crucial to the success of liberal democracy because they make open government a practical necessity. Policy solutions to complex political problems, he continued, require debate and dialogue, public engagement and participation in policy making, and the exchange of information among a range of stakeholders in and out of government. These virtues, he continued, also help explain the success of the post-war World War II liberal international order. So we're getting here into the kind of idea that this is really the kind of progressive side of American politics really believes that America has to extend its ideas. America kind of stands for something, and America should basically influence the rest of the world down this kind of road. And with the progressive kind of ideology, it basically means we're kind of part of this kind of evolving kind of relationship between government, corporations, civil society, which is supposed to represent us, and this is supposed to be our voice into this kind of system. And so the Obama administration went really heavily into this idea that they were going to lead on by making this their central kind of foreign policy kind of push. And he identified the people's declining trust in the institutions of government as another threat to American democracy, one that he attributed to the prevalence of powerful big money interests in politics. To restore the people's confidence in government, Obama challenged the American people to accept the responsibility of citizenship and more fully participating in the country's political life at all levels of government. And so this kind of paper here is interesting because it gets at kind of what this is kind of coming from. So, the 19th century liberal philosopher Jeremy Bentham systematized open government. For him, transparency, back then he and others called it publicity, is a political tactic that regulates the activities of the members of legislative assemblies and is meant to ensure the passage of good laws and thereby fulfill the utilitarian maxim of the greatest good for the greatest number. Collectively, for Bentham, the people are a tribunal, and their scrutiny of the goings on in the legislative chamber, such as the votes and the statements of legislators, is supposed to keep legislators honest and on task. Mistrust is at the root of public policy. Yet Bentham also stresses that publicity serves the critical function of legitimizing the legislative institution and empowers the people by giving them high confidence in their legislators' commitment to doing what is right. So there's a double-edged thing here where this also, by having systems which are seen as being open and transparent, it actually legitimizes these institutions when people often don't think they have much legitimacy. So there's been a crisis like this in the West really for decades. People have been writing about this going back to like Samuel Huntington and everything. They're talking about the crisis in Western democracy, and people aren't kind of believing in these concepts anymore. And pretty quickly in the Obama administration, it was shown that like a lot of this was hypocritical because he wouldn't release certain things about what America's intelligence services or CIA or whatever was doing. They were going after WikiLeaks. They were, and all of this stuff kind of continues. It continues through the Trump era. All of this stuff kind of continues. The foreign policy doesn't change that much. They don't really talk about this open and transparency stuff as much anymore. But back then, when he was kind of in, this was kind of what he was kind of how he was centralizing everything and focusing everything. So this is kind of part of liberal theory, liberal democratic theory. So the democratic peace theory argues that mature liberal democracies do not war with one another. So you've heard that phrase about McDonald's. Two countries that have a McDonald's have never gone to war, supposedly, right? This is how it's supposed to be. So I think the Russia-Ukraine thing, if not before, ended that theory. But regardless, there was a lot of belief in the 90s about this kind of thing, that two countries that are liberal, basically, that have a liberal kind of individual rights kind of culture, just won't go to war. And that this is because war is associated with despotic regimes or whatever. And that's kind of been shown to be not really true now. Because their citizens eschew war, which impinges individual liberty, their elected representatives are therefore reluctant to support war. And an alternative line of argument says that because these countries have a shared liberal identity, they respect one another and therefore pledge themselves to the peaceful resolution of disputes between them. Furthermore, because no such respect extends to countries with autocratic regimes, liberal democracies see them as enemies and therefore do not exercise the same restraint. A third line of argument says that liberal democracies are more reliable partners because of their openness relative to autocracies, which increases the prospects of cooperation with one another. So given that open government and transparency are organic to Republican liberalism, liberal theory basically says that liberal democracies consider it a national security imperative and therefore prioritize it at home and advance it abroad. So this is like America's soft power. They want to export liberal democracy to the entire world. And this is kind of what we're dealing with on a daily basis. There's this notion that America has this idea that it's a superior country. It's got the ultimate democratic system. Everyone else needs to just kind of grow up and learn that America got everything right. And there's a very chauvinistic kind of component to this culture. It's very childish, actually. It's very immature, but it is what we live with. And it comes in different guises. And as we'll see later, it comes under kind of the kind of leftist, kind of progressive kind of aspect, which is a huge part of this open government thing. And it also kind of comes then from the kind of peace through strength, kind of Reaganistic, rightist kind of idea, which is that America isn't that interested in your culture so much, but it is interested that you are open for trade and that you allow our military bases to kind of be in your country or whatever. So there's two kind of components that are very obvious in American foreign policy, but it doesn't matter ultimately which one is in charge because you're just getting a variation on this same kind of liberal expansionist kind of ideology. So the success of liberal democracy within countries and the maintenance of good relations among countries in the liberal democratic world depend in part on the activities of these groups in holding government to account and in serving as collaborators with government. So this is the NGOs basically in the policymaking process. So institutional liberalism says international institutions encourage cooperation between nation states, each of which is pursuing its self-interest on a range of often thorny issues like arms control, trade, and climate change. So that's basically the theory behind this. This is what it really comes down to. If your country is open, it'll have like a George Soros NGO basically operating there, training your students, training your activist class, basically how to influence and how to negotiate the democratic regime. And if your country is open, it will allow that. If your country is not open, like Orban's Hungary, it won't allow that. And then you're a target for regime change effectively. But it's all about these kind of institutions. The institutions are central. So the NGOs are actually a huge component of the liberal kind of idea. It's not simply the Republican kind of right wing kind of thing says that it's about the Constitution, and that's kind of what it comes down to. But the leftist kind of progressive aspect kind of says, no, it's actually about institutions. It's actually about NGOs and about how much access they have to influence your society for the greater good of the public. And of course, NGOs are a huge operation in terms of they can influence people in all kinds of ways, and who's funding them and who's driving them, who's setting the agenda. There's so many questions, but that is what the liberal theory kind of says. So this idea of soft power, this is where we're introducing this idea. And this comes from a guy called Joseph S. Nye, who maintains he's a famous geostrategist, probably the most important one in terms of international relations in the 20th century, perhaps. And he maintains that the soft power concept informs both foreign policy idealism and realism. Nye defines power as the ability to influence the behavior of others to get the outcomes one wants. He distinguishes three pathways and types of power. Coercive power relies on a country's threat or use of its material resources against another to get what it wants. This power pathway is most commonly found in military power. One country can also induce another to do something the latter might not otherwise do by offering it payments of one form or another, such as a lucrative trade or arms deal, which is evident in a second type of power, economic power. So we know that America and the West is very good at using military power and economic power. It often has to mask military power or kind of keep it as a last resort, but it's very good at using economic power. But of course, its ultimate power is actually in this third type of power. So he says, then there is the power to attract or co opt. One country's successful use of this power depends on another's accepting its goals as legitimate. This is what Nye means by soft power, the ability of one country to achieve its objectives abroad because other countries, admiring its values, emulating its example, aspiring to its level of prosperity and openness, want to follow it. And that's really the power which has framed Irish society, I would argue, probably more than anything else for the last 50 years. It is that soft cultural power. It's Anglo-American. Part of it was British, but it was very effective when it was brought when the American aspect comes in. So they come in, they have a lot of money, they invest, and they create a new elite. They manufacture an elite because they empower that elite. And this soft power comes through that because those people admire that kind of external power and they say that this is legitimate. Your progressive values are legitimate. These are the values that our country should hold. And so soft power is a very important concept. So these three types of power, military, economic, and soft power, these are actually hugely important and influential on a society. And they have been hugely influential in Ireland. And you're going to see an example of that tonight, I believe. So Nye identifies various sources of a country's soft power, aspects of its culture that are most attractive to others, its political values, when it observes them at home and abroad, its foreign policies, when other countries see them as legitimate and carrying moral authority, and economic and military resources that attract others, co opting and coercing them, or rather than co opting and coercing them. So, this is the kind of looking up to a country as a model of success, or they do it right. Their values and their social values are better than ours. We're backward. We're primitive. The Americans are more advanced. They're more progressive. I want to live like people in New York, and I want to be a lawyer, and I want to look on. The ideal kind of Irish shitlib is actually basically a New York lawyer, a human rights lawyer. That's the kind of archetype. So many people who have transformed Irish society have been basically human rights lawyers and things like that. Two sources of American soft power bear mention here because they are critical to the Obama administration's open government and transparency initiatives. American ideas and values are powerful sources of attraction. Their global appeal is evident in the reverence they enjoy in public discourse in the US and abroad, and in the domestic policies that put them into practical effect. The US is widely recognized as one of the world's most open societies and a country with a national government that ranks quite high for openness and transparency. America's history of welcoming immigrants, its multi-ethnic society, the freedoms individuals enjoy, and the progress it has made in advancing civil rights, among others, also appeal to people around the globe. Also, although it is hard to measure the effects of ideals and values on the ability of the US to get others to want what it wants, public opinion toward the US is favorable when American values are borne out in its behavior, in hard times especially. So basically, what you're seeing here is like this is the kind of formula on which liberal Ireland was actually built. Like people talk about NGOs are doing this or doing that, but ultimately it comes down to the public believes that these are legitimate values and that what they are doing is legitimate and good. And so this kind of leads us into you can see where this open and transparency kind of movement kind of gets its legitimacy from. Yeah, I'll just get off this and move on. But basically, the Obama administration's national security strategies of 2010 and 2015 call upon America to renew its global leadership by advancing universal values, including open government and transparency. Critical to this goal is the strengthening of American democracy in the form of strategic partnerships among the national government, the private sector, and the civil society in ways that depend on transparency, as well as strengthening of democracy abroad and greater transparency internationally more generally. And so the OGP, the Open Government Partnership, is a prime example of this commitment to America's leading by example. The OGP is meant to do for the global community of liberal democracies what the Obama administration open government initiative sought to do for America. That is, enhance government performance and thereby build public confidence in democracy through transparency, participation, and collaboration. The OGP takes its inspiration from the liberal idea that democratic countries form a special global community and share a set of. How often do you hear this? We are a global community. We are with the rules based order. And that democratic countries form a special global community and share a set of values that guide policy making. Included in the administration's national security strategy under the banner of American leadership in the world, and they championed then basically the OGP as fundamental to good governance and human freedom. I won't go on with this. This is a very useful article basically, and it really kind of solidifies a lot of my thinking on what this really is about and where it kind of comes from. So here's Nye. He's the guy who came up with this idea. He was a distinguished service professor, emeritus, and former dean of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. How often do we see this institution? Every time we talk about something like this, we're talking about the Kennedy School of Government. He received his bachelor's degree, summa cum laude, from Princeton University, won a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford. They all seem to do a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford, and earned a PhD in political science from Harvard. In a recent survey of international scholars, he was ranked as the most influential scholar on American foreign policy. And in 2011, Foreign Policy named him one of the top 100 global thinkers. Okay, that's our boy. And he just died there a few years ago. Now, and there he is. Yeah, and he had jobs in the Carter and Clinton administrations, which is really the reason I wanted to show you that is just simply to highlight that he had direct impact on the foreign policy. And there is this kind of British American kind of collaborative thing that's kind of we're seeing all the time kind of going on with this. So another thing I want to extract from this particular article here, this is another interesting one. It basically says Obama's main purpose was the creation of a transparent and collaborative government through the involvement of the citizens. Furthermore, he wanted to make his government more efficient and prepared for the challenges of the digital age. And then the new public management is an approach that integrates more elements of the private sector, like decentralization, autonomous agencies, or customer orientation into the public sector in order to create a more efficient public administration. So a lot of these ideas are actually coming from business. They're coming from corporate management culture and the application of that to the government. So again, don't think of it like this is communism. Think of it like this is basically a kind of a progressive kind of stakeholder engagement process in which we're all kind of supposed to take part, and it's supposed to lead us to a kind of a more perfect union basically. So the literature on open government is mostly derived from Obama's 2009 Open Government Directive, which we discussed in the last video. Obama focused on 3 principles for how open government should work. By new communication technologies, government should be transparent and provide information to the citizens on what it's doing. And second, the government should be participatory, enhancing public engagement. And so if we get you involved in the process, it legitimates the process. And of course, executive departments and agencies should use innovative tools, methods, and systems to cooperate among themselves across all levels of government with non-profit organizations. So the NGOs become part of the government process itself. And so those are some pretty good quality academic sources. I wanted to show something legitimate. And then we come to the kind of failure to do a lot of these things, really. So there's a kind of a cynical side to this. So Obama's soaring rhetoric, coupled with the symbolic significance of his bold actions on his first day in office in signing the OGP, or getting the ball rolling on it anyway, signaled a sharp break from the Bush administration's regime of excessive manipulative abusive use of secrecy. Advocates of open government were overjoyed. Barely 2 weeks later, however, these same advocates were dismayed when a Justice Department lawyer stood before a panel of appeals court judges and argued that a case brought by the American Civil Liberties Union on behalf of 5 men who were kidnapped, disappeared to CIA black sites, and tortured should be kicked out of court on secrecy grounds. So Obama's adoption of the Bush administration's argument that the very subject matter of the case was a state secret and therefore too secret to be scrutinized even by a US court was shocking. Obama had trumpeted transparency, banned torture, and ordered CIA prisons to be closed, yet his lawyers were continuing to wield secrecy as a weapon to immunize officials and their corporate enablers against accusations of human rights abuses. So that's just, this article basically runs through loads of examples of this and demonstrates that, a lot of these kinds of lofty claims or whatever are a lot more cynical than we'd like to admit. And so the the Obama administration was actually, not as, it gave a lot of data, but giving a lot of data doesn't necessarily mean that you have an open government. You can get a lot of junk data. You can be supplied with yeah, this article actually just briefly synopsizes some of that. So the internet's power to make government information more available and useful has, zoom that a bit, has in the last several years become a topic of keen interest for citizens, scholars, and policymakers alike. In the US, volunteers and activists have harnessed information that the government puts online in key domains, blah, blah, blah. And so they've made information available, and these new tools are definitely important. But the primary concrete result of this trend is that governments have made a growing range of public sector data available in machine processable electronic formats that are easier for others to use. Information that enhances civic accountability, including the pending congressional legislation and federal regulations, is indeed more readily available, but more mundane and practical government information, from bus schedules to restaurant health inspection data, is also being provided in friendlier formats. Such data can be used to improve quality of life and enhance public service delivery, but may have little impact on political accountability. And so this is where we get into this kind of like, are we being kind of hoodwinked with some of this stuff? So these new open government policies have blurred the distinction between the technologies of open data and the politics of open government. And so when we come to Ireland, you'll see a lot of that stuff is kind of, it plays out in Ireland very effectively. We're a star player in this open government initiative. And yet we closed Benefax, the only NGO that oversaw the NGOs. And would anyone seriously say that our government is acting in a transparent way regarding IPAS, regarding, channeling, billions in public funds to this kind of, ridiculous industry? I would say most people wouldn't even say that. So open data is not necessarily open government. And so let's talk about then some of the players then that we have to talk about tonight. So one of the people is this woman, Beth Simone Novak, and she is a professor at Northeastern University, where she directs the Burns Center for Social Change and his partner project, the Governance Lab. That's in more recent years. Now, previously, she served in the White House as the first US Deputy Chief Technology Officer under Obama. So she was brought in basically to kind of get this open government initiative basically technically running. And she founded the Open Government Initiative, which created policies and platforms such as data.gov and challenge.gov for making the federal government more transparent, participatory, and collaborative. She served as senior advisor for open government for Prime Minister David Cameron later on. And between 2018 and 2021, she served as Chancellor Angela Merkel's digital council, or on her digital council. She was inaugural co-editor of ACM's Digital Governance Research and Practice Journal. So she moved from the Obama administration to Britain and to Germany, where she basically got these, which I would argue are essentially client states of America in effect, but they basically, especially Germany, got them to basically implement a lot of this stuff in their countries, basically. and she's currently a member of the World Economic Forum's Future Council on Government Tech and Digital Public Infrastructure. So she's an important individual. This is why we're going to spend a little bit of time on her. So one of the things that in that government lab, for example, this is some of how this data can be used. So you have big data for migration, accelerating the responsible and ethical use of non-traditional data sources and methods to support migration policy on the global, national, and local levels. And there's a whole lot of little initiatives like this. There's the Open Governance Research Exchange, and they have so many projects here. So she kind of has gone back into the kind of into the academic area, running these kinds of projects basically. So you've got loads of stuff to do with migration, like so many projects ongoing with migration using data, and it involves the IOM, the International Organization for Migration. The EU Commission is involved on these projects with the government lab. So these projects are just ongoing. It's hard to fathom actually. Like this would require its own research into all of this. I'm bringing it up to show you that data is kind of oil. Data is the new oil basically, and a lot of these like getting all this data out of the government and everything, it actually allows for a lot of special interests to use data to pursue what they want to pursue. So, and engineering migration or driving, managing migration in the way that they want is just one output, one potential output. And of course, this is a huge industry. And so, this Beth Simone Novak, basically, when she was brought into this is George Osborne, former Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he's talking about this data stuff in 2011. And this is when he introduces her, basically. So he says that, and it already seems incredible that this time last year, the British public couldn't access even some of the most basic information needed to hold the government to account. Spending data broken down on an item-by-item basis, the contracts signed by central and local government procurement tender documents, the salaries of senior government officials, incidents of crime in your neighbourhood broken down on a street-by-street basis. Thanks to our efforts, these government data sets and over 6,000 others are now freely available to be analysed, interrogated and mashed up. But this is only the beginning. Over the next 12 months, we're going to unlock some of the most valuable data sets still locked away in government servers. This is the raw data that will enable you for the first time to analyze the performance of public services and of competing providers within those public services. And of course, this is also valuable. Getting all this data out actually is it offers so much potential economic opportunity for private entities as well. And he says, the economic impact of this open data revolution will be similarly profound. The annual global market for financial services data analytics is estimated to be worth over $20 billion. According to a new McKinsey report, the market for health analytics could be even larger, as much as $300 billion a year in the US alone. And as we all know, with internet-enabled sensors increasingly embedded in cars, in smart meters, and in our electrical appliances, the amount of data being produced is increasing rapidly. This so-called Internet of Things opens up the possibility of new services and tools, from the self-drive cars being developed by Google to powerful dynamic energy efficiency applications. I want the UK to be at the forefront of this new wave of innovation. So we're living in this world now, and when he said all those things 10, 12, 13 years ago, that seemed a little bit in the future. Right now in 2025, we're living in the Internet of Things. Your house probably has a smart meter. All kinds of information can be gleaned from that. Every single thing you do on the internet is essentially monitored by some kind of process or AI or some kind of technology. It's basically pretty much impossible to hide from all of this. And you can kind of see that this is a valuable kind of resource. It's like oil. It's like any other resource. So he says this is where he's announcing that he's bringing Beth Novak, who basically designed the technical aspects of the American Open Government Initiative. So he says, I'm pleased to able to tell you that we have just recruited Beth Novak, who used to work at the White House running up President Obama's Open Government Initiative, to help us take this agenda forward. I can't think of a better person to help us with this. After all, Beth literally wrote the book, Wiki Government, on how policy making needs to change in the internet age. I have that book here actually as well. And there's some things in there that are interesting. She's a genuinely world-class recruit, and she'll be working alongside the likes of Martha Lane Fox, Tim Kelsey, and Tom Steinberg, who's the other very important guy, to harness new technologies to make government more innovative and accountable. So when you read that, your tendency is to go, "Wow, I bet that's let me see now. I'm gonna borrow this book. Can I get it?" But your tendency is to assume that it's like this is communism. This is all communism. And I'm going to say that no, this is actually not communism. This is actually how um, liberal democracy kind of has developed in a kind of a natural sense. So, just want to get to the part I want to get to in this book. So she did this project called Peer to Patent, and this was kind of her. Uh, yeah, so this project she did, it was all about patent technology, and basically automating that process, basically. And so this project involved the Amadar network of that's the guy who created PR Amadar, who created eBay, and Hewlett Packard, Red Hat, General Electric, Computer Associates, and Intellectual Ventures. And basically, this was this and Microsoft. And basically, it was all about kind of automating through kind of crowdsourcing knowledge, basically getting patents basically passed in a quicker way. And so the idea is that you draw on the wisdom of crowds, basically. You draw on expertise that lies just outside the government. And basically you through a kind of a system you create, you are able to get to those kind of talented people who have skills, and they help you decide what to do with a particular patent and if it's a legitimate patent or whatever. And so this kind of led her then into this kind of way of developing things. So all of these foundations, the MacArthur Foundation, and everything. They basically backed her to do this, and this is one of the projects that kind of made um her career basically. And so it's notable that in this book also she cites Buckminster Fuller as well. And this I'm just pulling this out to show you that like she's not, this is kind of very much related to the American ideology, so she's talking about this idea of democratic design. And if you don't know who he was a famous futurist and everything. But democratic software design cannot. So her idea is with the patents is a form of democratic software design, and she says it cannot center on people's existing expectations, but should push both institutional players and participating citizens to learn a new idiom of collaboration. Democratic design is reminiscent of what Buckminster Fuller calls comprehensive anticipatory design science. And so this whole idea is really about kind of bringing liberal democracy, uh, realizing it in a more real, visceral kind of way. And so that's what's actually motivating people like her. It's not communism. It's not extreme left stuff. It's actually extreme liberalism in many ways. And so here is an interview with her where she actually describes this open government kind of phenomenon. She says, fundamentally, open government focuses on how to obtain more diverse and collaborative participation at every stage of decision making, akin to open invitation in business. Opening government is only partly about greater legitimacy. Rather, when more people with diverse forms of know how and expertise engage, The promise of open government is that it leads to more effective solutions to challenges, in much the same way that companies have found that turning to customers and suppliers for help has improved performance. Open government is about rethinking the relationship between the state and citizens. So this is kind of radical language. She's basically, what they're actually doing is they're actually designing a new way, a new form of government. They're calling more democratic, more liberal, and more open. But what it means basically is that they believe that we're going to end up kind of moving away from the oh, this is one of her earlier articles. Actually, I don't want to get into all this. We won't use this one, but this is interesting because it's where she's really kind of, when she's younger and she's talking about this kind of the ideas that she really has. It's really interesting to read that one. She's talking about Jürgen Habermas and how to basically take group information or group opinion and make it into a political process through technology and everything. It's quite insightful, and she's citing Cass Sunstein and Posner and all these guys. But I don't want to go into it. I'm not going to go into it. So she is one input into this whole kind of process, and she's the person who basically designed this thing in the Obama administration, right? So also feeding into this at the time and earlier is this thing called the Sunlight Foundation. And so the Sunlight Foundation went on to have its own huge influence over the open government partnership and everything. But basically, the Sunlight Foundation was a governmental transparency advocacy group pushing for largely center-left government transparency measures, and basically it was formed in 2006, and it closed, but 2020 I think it was officially. Was it 2020? It went into a bunch of scandals. Yes, it closed officially 2020, but it developed a whole lot of technologies and everything. And it was these guys, Michael Klein and Ellen Miller, they started the foundation. And then this guy, John Wunderlich, came in and everything. And it's all got to do with, this is the progressive side of the Democratic Party, basically. And they created this NGO called the Sunlight Foundation. And it was really all about public transparency, getting public information and data to the public in a way, coming up with different technologies to make that possible at a time when it wasn't being done, basically. And yeah, I mean, look at the grants. I mean, Amadar Network, Rockefeller Family Fund, several different Soros foundations, Ford Foundation, Google Foundation, Pew Charitable Trusts, and so on. MacArthur Foundation, Michael Bloomberg, he's hugely into sustainable development. Mark Cuban, ProPublican, all this, and the guy from Craigslist. But basically, there was a sexual misconduct controversy which ultimately closed it. But one of the institutions that was feeding into the open government thing, and of course the Open Society Foundation, that was doing a similar thing. This is a report from the Open Society Foundation. As we said in the earlier stream, last time, it was hugely influential in this whole movement with accountability and everything. This is a lot of these people are actually mentioned in this interview, in this document. But that's the American side. So that's the kind of some of the institutions that are feeding into it. And then another one, of course, is this thing called the Global Integrity. And this had a huge role in the Open Government Partnership as well. And we wanted to, this is where they explain what role they had in the process. And it's actually insightful because they explain who was involved in the process, basically. So the Open Government Partnership is a voluntary process by which governments commit to innovative open government reforms as part of a race to the top. Local civil society plays an important role in consulting with their government around potential commitments, and also will be monitoring government performance once commitments have been publicly announced. 8 governments have signed up, and those were the first 8, basically. And of course, Britain and all is involved in that. But he says in this article, and this guy actually is what's his name? Heller. Is his name Heller? Nathaniel Heller. Yeah, he's a hugely important person in this whole space, and he's currently a huge part of the he was a huge part of the whole international promulgation of this, basically. But he says it began in the summer of 2010 in this Open Government Partnership as an idea of a small group of NGOs, governance donors, many of which were involved with the Transparency and Accountability Initiative, and the US government, specifically Samantha Power and Jeremy Weinstein at the NSC. That group began discussing the idea of convening a small multi stakeholder meeting to discuss the open government movement globally, basically. At this point, no international multilateral initiative such as that was envisioned. The idea was to convene a brainstorming discussion, but it basically was civil society uh, being brought in by these guys, Samantha Power, Jeremy Weinstein, in the Obama administration, and agreeing then to kind of come up with this. So the USG, the government, and the Transparency and Accountability Initiative approached a small group of transparency, open government practitioners that fall to tease out whether and how interested the governments and NGOs might move ahead. And this resulted in a small brainstorming session in January 2011 in Washington, hosted by the US government. So the government is really driving this. Okay, the NGOs are being brought in, and the government is driving the kind of ship. Some of the groups in the room that session were the Open Society Foundation, George Soros' foundation, International Budget Partnership, National Security Archives, World Resources Institute, and a series of NGOs from the Global South and this global integrity, though we were not present at all of the meetings. Some of the governments included Brazil, Indonesia, Philippines, Mexico, Norway, and the UK. And the group decided that there was significant appetite to develop a collective initiative around open government that involved new concrete commitments from participating countries and a high level declaration of open government principles. And so, an independent monitoring reporting mechanism. The NGOs and governments decided to organize themselves into a steering committee and to oversee the initiative's development, which they duly did. And that's where you get the Open Government Initiative or program, or what's it called? Open Government Partnership. So, yeah, okay, we don't need to go on with all that, but basically, that's the American side of it. And it's driven by the federal government, basically, in the Obama administration as part of its soft power international outreach. But there's a British side to it as well, right? So there's this whole thing going on in Britain, and this diagram kind of explains the basics of what we're going to get into. So this Prime Minister's strategy unit is central to it all. So this there was a predecessor unit when Blair came in, basically in 98, 99. The Performance and Innovation Unit uh, is created within the UK Cabinet Office under Blair to enhance long-term cross-cutting policy thinking and innovative public services. And so Jeff Mulligan, a prominent social innovator and policy expert, serves as director of this unit from 2000 to 2002. He's a key figure in the early successes, bringing experience from founding the think tank Demos and later roles in international innovation, such as the CEO of Nesta from 2011 to 2019. And he's got a whole biography we're going to get into. But and then, of course, other staff at this unit are this guy called Tom Steinberg. He's the founder of My Society, a civic tech NGO behind tools like They Work for You and Fix My Street. He works in the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit, which is the predecessor from 2001 to 2003. And so his role as a policy analyst contributes to early thinking on digital government, open data, and e-democracy. This experience informs his later founding of My Society in 2003 and influential reports like The Power of Information in 2007. So this Prime Minister's Strategy Unit then basically is really Mulligan's kind of baby, and he becomes the first director, and he oversees his transition and early operations, and he is a hugely important individual. I mean, it's hard to overstate his influence, actually. He is one of the people, I would say, who, if you were to look at his biography and his output, you would have more knowledge about how the kind of global Western liberal order kind of functions than anything else, really. He has the ideology. He kind of combines this kind of Gnostic kind of uh, like social innovator kind of role with this kind of technocratic kind of control aspect as well. And it's all about institutions. It's all about using institutions to basically cultivate this kind of perfect democracy or whatever. And of course, the perfect democracy has to get rid of bad elements like us. So, okay, we move on from that. So his biography. So he's basically born into a major labor kind of activist family in 61. and became an activist as a teenager. Basically, spent time in Sri Lanka studying Buddhism and whatever the hell that is, and briefly tried monastic life, shaping his view that personal and social change are linked. And see, this is one of the things that people kind of often miss, I think, about this idea of kind of the social liberal state or whatever, is that it's actually very much they do have a major social innovation type idea. It's not communistic. It's actually about creating a more perfect liberal union in their mind. So it's important to kind of take them for what they kind of really kind of mean. And so he went to Belial, did PPE at Oxford, a very kind of standard education for a future elite and a future manager. And he studied telecommunications, and he basically then studied media, and he was in Greater London Council in the 80s when it was dominated. It was all this big Labour project, hugely influential into how New Labour under Blair developed. And he worked in broadcast and print media, including for the BBC and as a writer for The Guardian and The New Statesman. Yeah, Ken Livingstone's Greater London Council. And by the late 80s, early 90s, he had these academic roles. He was publishing books and about urban policy, economics, technology, communications. And he's been at London School of Economics, University of Melbourne, Harvard, and of course he created Demos, the think tank, which is a very important think tank, which another time we could get into. But he co-founded that in 1993 and serves as its first director. And he led Demos's work on democracy, culture, social capital, changing governance in the network society, as he called it. And he began co-funding or helping to launch initiatives such as the Social Innovation Exchange, Uprising, the Australia Centre for Social Innovation, and Action for Happiness. He's done so many NGOs, it's unbelievable. And of course, then he advised Blair. Blair picked him as kind of, he spotted the talent, basically. He said, this guy is serious, and he picked him up. And yeah, and of course, then in the 2000s, he ended up at MIT for a year, where I believe he was on a scholarship there to MIT at the Media Lab. And his hero is Michael Young, who was he was probably the guy you could say created the idea of social innovation, I suppose, in a way. He was a serial founder of institutions like that as well, and he led the Young Foundation then, basically. Uh, and then he did Nesta, and then basically he's been active his whole life. It's crazy. He's got an amazing career. And so here he is interviewed back in nearly 20 years ago. And he says, this is an article in The Guardian, and says, Jeff Mulgan is the ultimate new Labourite. He used to be head of policy at Number 10 and founded the Blairite think tank Demos, but now he's out of the political cockpit and intent on radical social change. And so he says, when someone finally gets around to making the definitive new Labour movie, you can imagine it. Our friends in the North meet primary colours with the inevitable Britpop soundtrack. They will have to base at least one character on Jeff Mulgan. The PR at his publisher emails his CV to me the day before we meet, and it is so packed with the stuff of recent history that you wonder how he has found time to fit it all in. From the top then, between 97 and 94, he was in the government, including director of the government strategy unit and head of the policy in the Prime Minister's office. Before that, he was the founder and the director of Demos, described by The Economist as the UK's most influential think tank, chief advisor to Gordon Brown, and a reporter for the BBC. On top of all that, Mulgan is apparently a World Economic Forum global leader of tomorrow and was ranked in 2004 as one of the UK's leading 100 intellectuals. And he is a CBE. And so he talks about being younger and everything, and he says, yeah, he was involved with this thing called Red Wedge with Billy Bragg and all these guys, the guy from the Communards and everything. And so he is a natural activist, and it's hard to kind of understand these people if you come in at it from our perspective, because we want the government to be kind of contained generally and kind of easily understood, whereas these guys are all about kind of creativity, and we have to innovate. We have to come up with new ways of realizing kind of democratic principles or whatever. So yeah, he was a Harkness Fellowship basically, which is a little bit like a Rhodes Scholar, kind of like in the reverse. I won't go into all that. It was founded by this American family basically. but he is profiled in a number of books. Just waiting for this to load up. Refresh. No, here we are. Okay, stop that. Okay, so yeah, Mulligan is a serious character. I can just get these books to open up. Okay, here's one anyway. And there he is sitting on the chair actually. But basically, yeah, this book is all about social alchemy, right? So if you followed my work kind of recently, and it's kind of more niche, but I talk about this idea of like modern education and kind of the modern technocratic state, basically, kind of deriving from earlier alchemical principles and principles which are kind of non-rational, which we kind of don't tend to kind of acknowledge as much. But this book is all about what it's called social alchemists, and it lists all kinds of, because it gives biographies of all these guys. And so to kind of see why they like Mulligan. So basically, Jeff, when he left Demos in '97 to take up a role in the center of government, attracted by the opportunity to turn ideas into reality, but it is his creation of Demos that earns him a place in this book. I like creating institutions, he says, as do most of our alchemists. And he has been involved in conceiving and launching institutions as varied as Red Wedge, the University uh, for Industry, and more recently, the Social Exclusion Unit. But it requires a certain presumption to found one designed to help shape the the politics of the next century when one is still in one's 20s. So this is years ago. Perhaps this perhaps that is the time to do it before the bright gleams of new ideas become clouded by the practicalities of power and increasing responsibilities. If so, then Jeff's alchemy needs to be imitated by others. He himself is impressed by the young talent now in the demos he left behind, many of whom are even younger than he was at the beginning. In Jeff Mulligan, so this is what these kinds of people do: is that they create institutions and they basically gather young, impressionable, idealistic people who are very determined to carve out kind of careers for themselves and make their mark. And a guy like Jeff Mulligan will basically take you and basically build you into the. Trying to get this to zoom in so you can read it, but I can't do it. Sorry. But anyway, yeah. In Jeff Mulligan's case, the seeds of social alchemy were visible early on. At the age of 14, he was recruiting teenagers for the trade unions, leading them in campaigns against the National Front, knocking on doors, marching, fundraising. He was, he says, always questioning, reading voraciously, mixing adolescent rebellion and idealism, forever in trouble with authority. It was the hypocrisy I hated, the gap between the official values of society and what it does. So these are the true believers in liberal democracy. It must have left his parents slightly bemused, he says, but they remained loving and supportive. He was, after all, the third child who was traditionally more indulged. And he was clever, winning a scholarship to a public school and going on to Oxford in due course, where again he was more concerned with town than gown, recruiting the unemployed into trade unions, for example, and still organising action against the National Front. Always it was practical action that appealed, not political parties. Then he went into the Greater Oxford and then Greater London Council of Ken Livingstone, arriving there 9 days before its abolition was announced. There he learnt that it is not enough to be open to new ideas, as that organisation famously was. But the Greater London Council was also badly mismanaged and politically and self-indulgent. It was ineffective and ultimately doomed. Redundant at its closure, he applied for and won a Harkness Fellowship, which brought him to study at MIT, where the computer buffs were reinventing the world. He also got to work for the Democrats at Iowa primary in 1987, with the likes of Al Gore, Michael Dukakis, and Jesse Jackson, the great race baiter. He went to America with many adverse stereotypes in his mind, most of which he says were quickly disproved. And anyway, so the point of reading that is you're kind of trying to get you an insight into this man's mind and how he sees the world, his experiences, how he thinks. And of course, you're seeing this Anglo-American thing going on. So there's this synergy between the English-speaking world, basically, where you have Britain and America. There's always this, for a lot of these operatives you come across, they often have this kind of background. The PPE at Oxford, the Rhodes Scholarship, and then they're in a think tank, and then they're repeatedly creating think tanks. And so it talks here about creating demos as well. I'm not going to get into all that because it's just not we have to move on with the idea. But the idea of these guys being alchemists, it feeds into what I write about, particularly in this article. So if you go to my Substack, basically in the link below, you will see an article there, a very long article. It's an intense read, but it's called The Great Instauration and 17th Century Ireland. Someday I will write a more complete article dealing purely with the idea of creating a new society, creating a kind of a year zero and creating a perfect world or whatever. It deals with utopianism. This is the way these guys are. Mulligan is an idealist, and you can't really understand an idealist unless you understand what he believes. And it's wrong to merely kind of view people like Mulligan as social engineers. They're very interested in social engineers, but they are also idealists. And I would say more accurately, they're kind of social Gnostics in that they believe they can create a perfect society, basically, where one doesn't exist currently, or a more perfect society, at least, anyway. Oh, yeah, this is an interview. I don't want to get into this, actually. Sorry. Yeah, he talks.
Breathe in, email Summers.
We won't waste time with it because I think you get an idea who he is. Yeah, there's a more complete biography there, but yeah, you see at the bottom here, I wanted to point this out because this is how he views himself. He is the founding joint editor-in-chief of the journal Collective Intelligence. So it's the idea of like kind of crowdsource intelligence, basically. So he's very much in the area of what we're talking about here. And that unit that he led, basically, was central to the development of a lot of this open government, open data type policies, basically. So with Mulligan and with Steinberg and these guys. So many of the ideas Jeff has worked on have gone on to become mainstream, from creative economy strategies to social investing. So this idea of social impact investment, he is foundational to that, very important thinker. Open data to collective intelligence, experimental and evidence-based government to policies for well-being and challenge-driven innovation. And as you can imagine, he's done TED Talks. Okay, so here is, I just wanted to point, this is his book from, it's one of the early books he did, just to show you that he has always been dealing with communications in particular. Yeah, I won't get into it, but we won't review it. But another time, I would love to do a stream on him, dedicated, because he's a very interesting man. So this is one of his early books from the early 90s. It's called Communication and Control. And, this is where he's kind of, he's fresh after dealing with that experience at MIT Media Lab. Also, Bet Simone Novak was at that MIT Media Lab for a while as well. So that's you're seeing that Anglo-American kind of relationship there. And it's all, he deals with all the classic communications stuff from Marshall McLuhan and all. And I think if you read that, you can get that on archive.org. You can really get an insight into how these guys are thinking, So they're looking at these new post-industrial kind of societies and how the internet is going to radically change all this. Communication technologies are changing, control economies, the limits of state control and deregulation, communicative values, standardization, rethinking public control. I bet that chapter is very interesting. So this idea of social innovation is basically where he kind of falls in, right? So social innovators or innovations are new social practices that aim to meet social needs in a way that in a better way than the existing solutions, resulting from, for example, working conditions, education, community development, or health. These ideas are created with the goal of extending or strengthening civil society. So again, the NGOs, the institutions, these are the engine of the whole thing. Without that, it's not really possible. Social innovation includes the social processes of innovation, such as open source methods and techniques, and also the innovations which have a social purpose, like activism, crowdfunding, time based currency, telehealth, co housing, co working, universal basic income, collaborative consumption, social enterprise, participatory budgeting, and on and on and on and on, basically. Okay. Social innovation can mean pretty much anything that is basically designed to kind of supposedly improve society or make us healthier or happier or solve some problem caused by bad health or bad economic situations. And that is what's happening in Ireland really since the 90s in a big way. And it began in earnest in the 80s with the European structural funds. And that's how our society has kind of been gamified. Um, Very important concept. So, along with Mulligan in that prime minister's unit, you had a guy called Tom Steinberg. And he's another one of these social innovators. He's another, you know, outside the box innovator, social innovator. And if this link opens up, I'll explain his a brief bio. So he is the founder and director of My Society, an international non-profit group which aims to help people become more powerful in the civic and democratic parts of their lives through digital means. And it runs these different websites, these transparency websites. Yeah, so his interest in technology and government comes from an unusual background in both fields. Having worked in a sysadmin and junior think tank researcher, he became a policy analyst at the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit in from 2001 to 2003. So he was there with Mulligan. So these guys are close basically. And so outside of My Society, Tom is frequently asked by governments to help formulate policy advice relating to digital issues. Tom also has advised governments and parties across the spectrum of countries and a range of ideological positions. So again, don't think of these guys as purely like left wing phenomena, although they are generally seen on the left. But really, they don't see themselves as like as communists or anything. They see themselves really as innovators, as social innovators. And so this thing he founded, My Society, it's it began basically when a small group of coders got together to discuss a shared interest. They wanted to explore the potential of the internet to give everyone easier access to the political process. That was way back in 1996. Since then, we've been rather busy growing into a fully fledged international organization along the way. And so they've all these annual reports and everything. And so this goes through the timeline. Basically, what you have is a small group of developers basically get together and they call it UK Citizens Online Democracy. So they're thinking of how do we use the internet basically to kind of revolutionize democracy. And these ideas are percolating on in Britain and America at this time. And then in an Open Democracy article, James Crabtree suggests that the UK government should set up a civic hacking fund in 2003. Tom Steinberg takes the idea, gives it a polish, and basically then his institution sets up the My Society project and recruits many of its core people from groups who are already hacking on projects that fit in with this vision. And so that's when that's born in 2004. And then there's all these different websites he sets up then to basically allow for the public to kind of monitor what public officials are doing, you know. And yeah, there's loads of them. All the different campaigns throughout the years. But the yeah, that's just one of the projects they did. But where we want to go here, this is the article by James Crabtree. And again, this is an important guy. And so civic hacking. So he was one of the guys in this nest of kind of people, network of people dealing with these e-democracy kind of ideas. And Yeah, so he says the question is simple. What is this ethic of e-democracy? What is the underlying principle that should guide us in this process of development? The current consensus is that money and time should be spent developing new ways of allowing citizens to interact with Parliament and the state. It claims that representation is the ethic of e-democracy. I disagree. Marshall McLuhan's dictum was the medium is the message. At base, this means that certain media or mediums are good at doing different things. The internet is peculiarly effective at connecting groups together. In fact, this is what it does best. So a sensible strategy would start on this principle, but the people it should be connecting are not citizens and parliamentarians or voters and civil servants. It should be connecting ordinary people with ordinary people. And there should be applications that help these people to help each other. A program supporting civic hacking can do this. So a lot of it's kind of libertarian kind of minded. This should become the ethic of e-democracy, mutual aid and self-help among citizens, helping to overcome civic problems. It should encourage a market of application development. It would encourage self-reliance or community reliance rather than reliance on the state. So these are all the kind of libertarian, leftist, generally kind of ideas that are percolating around at that time. Steinberg, Crabtree, Jeff Mulligan. These are the English side of it. You have Wunderlich, the Sunlight Foundation, Beth Simone Novak in America. They're all percolating around, and there's some overlap here and there, but basically they have their own kind of things. And so one of the projects that here's a collaboration, for example, between Jeff Mulligan's Nesta organization that he founded and Beth Simone Novak's government lab, for example, and it's called the Data Driven Data Driven and Collaborative Solutions Conference, basically. And so a gathering of the MacArthur Research Network began with a closed policy innovation workshopping session with leading UK government reformers. This is in 2015. And was followed by a day-long public forum examining data's impact and new methods to gather data geared towards open governance. Network members and guests included Arizona State University, Cornell Tech, Nesta, the government's lab. The United Kingdom participants explored questions such as how can data help create new opportunities for citizens to collaborate with governing institutions to improve people's lives? How can new forms of collaboration? So remember, the Open Government Partnership is all about this kind of idea. Officially, we all have the ability to interact with government through these structures. How can new forms of collaboration in the form of collective intelligence and networked expertise produce the data-driven insight that can improve decision-making related to healthcare delivery, user-driven service design, and more? And of course, it had following members. You had Jeff Mulligan from Nesta, Beth Simone Novak from the Government Lab, after designing the American and contributing to the British and German open government systems. And of course, you had Tim Berners-Lee, who was supposedly the creator of the internet, I'm told. I don't know. And then you had some other participants. You had Thomas Steinberg, of course. He was there. And we're not going to dwell on that. But that's just to show you that these guys do collaborate. They have conferences. They're thinking. They're always innovating, basically. Always there's a whole kind of itinerary laid out here, so you have Novak and Mulligan. They're all engaging here in conversation on certain topics. And so this brings us to another the last one of these organizations I'm going to profile in this kind of nexus of people is the Open Knowledge Foundation. And so the Open Knowledge Foundation is a global nonprofit network that promotes and shares information at no charge, both content and data. It was founded by this guy, Rufus Pollock, on the 20th of May, 2004 in Cambridge, England. It is incorporated in England and Wales, and blah, blah, okay? So this guy founded this organization, and it's all about open data. He's got a whole bio, but you can see that I picked out some of the reports just to kind of point out a couple of things. Grants from a substantial, so this is back in 2012, 2013 report. Grants form a substantial part of our revenue. We have primarily project grants, which fund specific kinds of activities. Our grants come from a wide range of funders, and we would like to thank all the new organizations that have supported us in the last year. So around that time, just after the Open Government Partnership has been basically created in America, This guy gets an injection. His foundation gets a boost basically from the Amadar network, which had supported Bet Simone Novek and the Open Societies Foundations, which is very involved in this open data, open government type thing, the Sloan Foundation, and of course the Shuttleworth Foundation, who support the foundation through their support of me as a fellow. So this guy who actually Shuttleworth Foundation, that's actually kind of a smaller foundation. It's really just interested in technological kind of freedom or whatever. But the project, you can see the capital is international. The capital is American, and there's this kind of cross pollination going on, and this is notable. Okay, and the next thing I wanted to point out then, in an earlier report from 2010, 2011, they say so again in 2010, so this is the time before the Open Government Partnership had been formulated, and when it was just getting kind of established as a working group quietly with the government, basically in America and a few choice foundations. These guys had a data camp in 2010. So the first international open government data camp took place on the 18th and 19th of November 2010 at the University of London Union. The high-profile event brought together participants from over 30 countries for 2 days of workshops, talks, planning, and coding. Speakers included David Eves, Beth Novek again, Tim Berners-Lee, and Tom Steinberg. So they're all, they're in that kind of milieu, and they're spreading these ideas, and as they are being brought into American soft power foreign policy, basically, which is highly relevant to the whole thing we're going to finish up on in a few moments. But before that, just a little bit about Pollock. He's the founder of this organization, so he's an entrepreneur and an activist. Um, uh, so he's an entrepreneur, activist, and an author, as well as a long-term Zen practitioner. He's passionate about finding wiser, weller ways to live together. He wants his child and all children to live in a world of love, abundance, and wisdom. Sounds lovely. He has founded several successful for-profit and non-profit initiatives, and some unsuccessful ones, and all these different things. Open Knowledge Foundation included. His book Open Revolution is about making radically freer and fairer information age, and has been translated into multiple languages. His next book, Wiser Societies, is about the cultural dark matter that enables societies to be wiser and weller. Previously, he has been a Mead Fellow in Economics at the University of Cambridge, as well as a Shuttleworth and Ashoka Fellow. And the Ashoka Fellows thing, that's a huge part of the whole social entrepreneur type thing. We could do a whole stream on that. It's founded by Bill Drayton, who's a very famous economist and activist, basically. I think he's the guy who actually coined the term social innovator. I can't remember now, but he's very relevant to it. And the Ashoka Fellows, there's a number of Irish ones as well. And so we'll have to explore this idea of social innovation in the Irish context in another stream. But that's just to show you who these guys kind of are, basically. He's also profiled at Nesta. That is Jeff Mulligan's other big kind of project. And so they're a huge fan of him, of course. And so one of the things that his foundation, the Open Knowledge Foundation, did was they created the Comprehensive Knowledge Archive Network, which is the leading open data platform for storing and distributing data. And the platform encourages public collaboration and transparent data publication standards, and is used by the UK's data.gov and the EU data portal. Why we like Rufus. Dr. Rufus Pollock is a prominent technologist, making data more open and accessible. And just go list all these different projects here. So he's a social entrepreneur, basically. So he's loved by these guys in the open knowledge, in Nesta. Okay, that's just the background of that, his foundation. So the next thing we want to go into then is that, just to show you how this was kind of picked up as part of Obama's foreign policy. So there's this thing called the National Democratic Institute. It's a prominent component of American foreign policy, basically. There's several, many similar institutions, basically. But this institution in particular is very much involved in in American soft power. It's very much related to the uh, American Democratic Party side of the foreign policy spectrum. And so here's an article from Influence Watch, which does some good articles on these kinds of NGOs and everything. And it basically explains that the NDI, or National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, works with partners in developing countries to increase the effectiveness of democratic institutions. The institute was founded in 1983 as one of the core institutes of the National Endowment for Democracy to support democracy abroad, and has partners in 130 countries. So during the Reagan era, basically, there was a big shakeup in American foreign policy. There had been all these scandals about the CIA overthrowing governments in this country and that country. And basically, they moved to this more soft power with a bit of counterinsurgency thrown in. And this is where the NDI comes out of. So the NDI is formally nonpartisan, but by its own description has a loose affiliation. I'll zoom in for you if you want to see that. Loose affiliation with the Democratic Party in the United States. It does not operate in the US or involve itself in US elections. It's formally nonpartisan, but Republican associated counterpart is the also under the auspices of the National Endowment for Democracy is the International Republican Institute. So, like I said in the start, there's a left and a right kind of version of American foreign policy, and they kind of basically work towards the same thing, but they go about it in slightly different ways. So the Democratic Party uses the National Democratic Institute, and institutions like that, kind of like USAID was a huge aspect of it, which is now gone, to basically influence societies through development policy and to pursue soft power to try and influence them to take on the American kind of way. The organization was founded in the Reagan era, basically, by former Vice President Walter Mondale and Paul G. Kirk, a former chairman of the Democratic National Committee in the 1980s. And the NDI asserts there is no single democratic model, but that certain core principles are shared by all democracies, as set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So it very much is like this side of the American foreign policy is pro-UN. Like they are very much interested in being part of the UN, whereas the Republicans tend not to like it, and they tend to focus on our constitution and they don't want to interfere as much. So the NDI focuses on helping citizens engage in their country's political process. The organization states, a century ago, Woodrow Wilson urged us to build a world safe for democracy. Today, we strive for democracy to keep our world safe. The NDI promoted democratic reform in the Philippines and Chile in the 1980s, in Eastern Europe after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and across Africa, Asia, and Latin America in the 1990s after the Cold War was over. The NDI began a program of inclusion of traditionally marginalized populations that focuses on women, youth, LGBT, and individuals with disabilities in the 2000s. So this is kind of like the butt sex in Botswana kind of thing, which people kind of joke about with American foreign policy, the GAE, the gay global American empire. This is kind of what it really kind of boils down to. It's actually about this kind of soft power of like, if you look at how Ireland was, like we could do a whole stream talking about Ireland alone, about how NGOs basically drove gay liberation in Ireland. Basically, about 8 NGOs, 10 NGOs were basically given a lot of money by Chuck Feeney, who is an American operative. If you haven't worked that out by now, it's obvious Chuck Feeney is, he's an important individual who came with a bag of money from Bermuda and was able to basically totally transform Irish politics. That's American soft power, and it's also American economic power, I guess, because there's physically money changing hands. But by encouraging that civil society infrastructure, they were able to totally transform Irish society. And this is where people joke about this stuff, like America is just spreading the LGBT and the rainbow flag everywhere. What's going on? Well, this is what's going on. This is the leftist kind of side of American foreign policy. And it kind of works a little bit differently when it's a Republican administration. But these institutions are always there. They're always there. And so the organization worked with activists in the Arab Spring in 2011, in the Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity in 2014, and other democracy movements in newly formed and fragile states. So nothing, you'll be aware of those conflicts and everything. That's what that institution is. And I'm bringing it up for a reason. Now, its overseeing institution is called the National Endowment for Democracy. And just to explain what this is, so the National Endowment for Democracy basically gives money to all kinds of front organizations, and it's funded from the Congress, the US Congress. So National Endowment for Democracy is a private nonprofit grant-making organization that supports the development of democratic institutions around the world. Though formerly private, the NED is almost entirely funded by the US Congress. Annually, it distributes 2,000 grants with an average value of 50 grand in more than 100 countries. Detractors have accused the NED of functioning as an extension of US diplomacy and intelligence that undermines hostile foreign governments. That would be my view, broadly speaking. I'm not saying everything they've ever done is bad, and I'm not an idiot about it, but I mean, they do interfere in countries basically, and they have an agenda. So, and I came across this during the Arab Spring. That was my kind of big eye opening moment where I realized, okay, there's something going on here with all of these, revolutions going on. What the hell is going on? That led me into the color revolution concept and everything, and the work of uh, several people actually, who wrote about all of these events basically. But regardless, the NED was credited. So though similar concepts had been considered in the past, the origin of the NED is credited to a speech given by then President Ronald Reagan at the Palace of Westminster, in which he proposed a program to foster the infrastructure of democracy, the system of a free press, unions, political parties, universities, which allows a people to choose their own way, to develop their own culture, to reconcile their own differences through peaceful means. So this is all going back to the start of the discussion here tonight, where I was talking about soft power and about this is actually the basis. This is about realizing liberal values, basically liberal democratic values. This is what this is about. It's not about communism. Reagan isn't a communist, and yet he sounds like Samantha Power in this speech. So in a way, Reagan is like the biggest con man ever, because all these Americans think he's like this ultimate right wing ideal, and in reality, Reagan gave you amnesty in California. uh, he was very liberal on immigration. He thought everyone coming to America was going to magically become American, and so on. And this is the kind of reality of Reagan, in that it was during his administration that this stuff kind of kicked off, and this kind of soft power stuff really ramped up in a big way. And so this to this end, the American Political Foundation, a bipartisan think tank with a similar mission, was given $300,000 grant by the USAID to determine how the US can best contribute as a nation to the global campaign for democracy, and now gathering force. The grant transformed the foundation into the democracy program, which recommended the establishment of the NED basically. In 1983, the NED was given an initial budget of 31.3 million, though its funding soon fell to 18 million. The NED accepts private donations. Nearly all its funding has come from annual appropriations from US Congress. So, and the four core grantees include the Solidarity Center, the National Democratic Institute, which is left leaning, and then you have the Center for International Private Enterprise and International Republican Institute, which lean right. So you have two left, two right, two Democrat, two Republican. And this is how American foreign policy basically works. One pursues these institutions, which is what you see in Ireland in a big way, and the other one is more about economics and kind of is a little bit less meddling. It tends to be. So why did I bring up the NDI? Well, the NDI in 2013 basically awarded people. They have this award. It's actually called the Averell Harriman Award. Um, Never called it a democracy award. I think it used to be called an Averell Harriman Award, but anyway, he was a famous, American politician. But basically, this is from the government lab of Beth Simone Novak, and it says the government lab is delighted and proud to be awarded the 2013 NDI Democracy Award as a Civic Innovator of the Year. So this is the American government is honoring basically these guys for promoting democracy around the world. So the government lab's director, Beth Simone Novak, together with 12 other individuals and organizations, have exhibited a sustained commitment to democracy and human rights, and have demonstrated leadership, integrity, and courage in their dedication to democratic values and practices. And they will be honored at a dinner in Washington and in December of 2013. Right. So cool, right? Who got the awards? Well, if you look at the list, I'm going to go through them, but our boys, Tom Steinberg, he got one. Rufus Pollock of the Open Knowledge Foundation, he got one. Ellen Miller of the Sunlight Foundation, they got one. This guy, Gregor Harmack, in Germany, he created a thing called Parliament Watch, which we'll profile. He got one. And this is important because this shows you there's a kind of an infrastructure operating throughout Europe, which is basically American influence, and it's using this as soft power and it's spreading it basically throughout our countries. Jared Cohen, director of Google Ideas, and Ginny Hunt, the strategy principal of Google Civic Team, they got one. Jared Cohen wrote a book with Eric Schmidt of Google, basically all about this exact thing, technology and democracy. So the reason I'm talking about the NDI is because the NDI, as a major tool of American foreign policy, is awarding these people for their work in this regard. And it's pretty interesting. So I actually have the a bit more about this. So yeah, so with remarks by Samantha Power, I mean, this is it's actually unreal. Like, so with remarks by Samantha Power, U.S. Permanent Representative to the UN, and again, she launched the Open Government Partnership like pretty much a year before that. Like, um, and Jack Dorsey, the CEO and founder of Twitter, the event will bring together approximately 800 senior government officials, democracy and human rights leaders, and others to celebrate NDI's 30th anniversary and present the 2013 Democracy Award. Okay, so the NDI's Avril Harriman Democracy Award honors individuals and organizations that have exhibited a sustained commitment to democracy and human rights. Okay, so it is the Avril Harriman Award. I didn't imagine that. That's good. If you want to look up Avril Harriman, I haven't got time to go into it, but he was a very important diplomat in the Second World War and in the Cold War. Arguably one of the people who created the Cold War, actually. But regardless, so here's all the people getting the award. So the guy from Twitter, Jack Dorsey, is getting the Democracy Award. And you have to ask yourself, hang on a minute, why is the guy from Twitter getting the fucking Democracy Award? Well, if you'll remember back to that time, the Twitter and social media was actually central to how these revolutions were taking place all across the Arab world. They were all using Twitter, and the whole push, the whole kind of narrative in the Western media at the time, and I remember because I was literally there listening to it, was, oh no, this is just democracy being spread. We're just spreading democracy. Nothing illegal here. No, these are not jihadists. They're absolutely not jihadists, and we're not going to end up with an Islamic State. Absolutely not. Gaddafi must go. Syria must give up and accept that we're going to have a new regime. And this was all part of American geostrategy, basically. And this was a huge, y'all with a red pill. This was a huge red pill for me because I was reading a lot of the kind of alt media at that time, and I was kind of learning about some of these concepts. And so I was reading F. William Engdahl, who's a very famous kind of geopolitical writer. He's written all about this. It was Garrow the coal mine was active at that time in Ireland. He was writing about this. He was kind of coming from a leftist perspective, but he was out in Syria and these places, Libya and all. He was kind of documenting what was going on, and it was a real eye opener. Like in that, okay, you have this kind of nod and a wink going on between Twitter and, like, if you read the literature that those guys were writing, they were basically explaining how this technology is being harnessed to basically do what the Bush administration had failed to do. They were trying to complete a revolution, basically. So they were trying to get a new regime all across North Africa. And this ended up, it ended up with the migrant crisis of 2015, which was after that point, that was when I became really interested in the migration issue, because I could see that, okay, they've succeeded in driving millions of people into Europe through this strategy, whether deliberate or not. We could debate whether it's deliberate or not, but it was a serious eye opener to me. So here is Beth Simone Novak getting her award, and she is the founder of the Governance Lab, and she is the first director of the White House Open Government Initiative. She designed and collaborated on projects such as the data.gov, challenge.gov, and all the rest of it. Okay, so yeah, and there's a famous TED talk she has, Demand a More Open Government. And if you look at all of these people today, they're now all talking about the need to censor the internet. Like it's actually crazy, like how quickly this is, how quickly it changes, So she got an award, right? So they're getting rewarded for spreading democracy. They're just spreading democracy, not untoward here, you know, not untoward here. Um, and here's Rufus Pollock. He got an award from the Open Data Movement, from the Open Knowledge Foundation. So he founded that in 2004, like we said, and developed all these standards and everything that are used to get data from the government out and everything. And there he is. He got his award. Uh, Jack Dorsey got his award. So, as the chairman and co founder of Twitter, Jack Dorsey has been a driving force behind one of the most influential global communications innovations. Twitter's implications for democracy are as multifaceted as its uses, and from organizing protests to facilitating more regular communication. Now, right now, as I'm speaking to you right now, the whole thing has gone 180. Okay. I remember this time in particular, everyone was saying, oh, how open Twitter is. And it's great that all these people, every government in the West was celebrating this and saying how great this was. And right now, these same institutions are developing radical censorship practices in order to stop their own people from using the internet to organize protests, to have a debate, to spread their message. So Twitter has altered the landscape of political communication, giving millions of citizens and new means of communicating. Dorsey is now bringing the same kind of change to society through his company Square, which aims to make commerce easy for everyone. With the understanding that small businesses are the backbone of civil society, Square has enabled a whole new wave of entrepreneurs to contribute to local communities and the national economy. So you have to look at Twitter. Twitter has always been central to American foreign policy. So when you see people going on about Elon Musk buying X and everything now, like, show them this, okay? Because this is what was like. I remember, like, people were putting all kinds of stuff on Twitter. People were using Twitter to organize these protests, and many of which turned very violent. And it was celebrated in the West. So here's Jared Cohen. He was a huge part of the American foreign strategy at this time in the Obama administration. As founder and director of Google Ideas, Jared Cohen has used his experiences as an advisor to former secretaries of state Condoleezza Rice and Hillary Clinton to help tackle a range. Oh, it was Clinton he was advising. Okay, to help tackle a range of thorny issues from small arms to human trafficking. And so he did this project basically with Google, and and he's all about foreign policy, and of course here he is, the co-author with Eric Schmidt of the New York Times bestseller, The New Digital Age: Reshaping the Future of People, Nations, and Business. So this was the kind of idealism that the kind of left side of American foreign policy had about Twitter and about social media and about how they were going to use communications technology to basically revolutionize democracy and make our societies more progressive. But all of that changed when Trump got in and when Brexit happened. And again, I lived through it. I observed it. It would make a great stream. But I'm just wanting to talk about this aspect of it tonight when they were optimistic about it. And one of the other, along with Jennifer Palka, Ellen Miller, Ellen Miller, she is of the Sunlight Foundation. She got an award that was hugely important in developing the Open Government Partnership and everything. This character here, this German guy, Gregor Hackmack, he got an award from the NDI, and so he is the co-founder of Parliament Watch, an independent web platform that gives German citizens the ability to ask public questions and receive public answers from their members of parliament online. The site, funded primarily by small donations from its members, sees more than 300,000 visitors and 6,000 unique questions every month. More than 90% of all members of the German Bundestag have answered questions from their constituents on the site. And so it's all about, public accountability, right? So, and so the platform has been successfully exported to Luxembourg, Austria, Ireland, France, and Tunisia. And so he is also an Ashoka Fellow from Bill Drayton for social entrepreneurship and was appointed a young global leader by the World Economic Forum in 2010, right when people used to just consider the World Economic Forum was just Davos and it was about Bertie Ahern in a white suit that looked out of place. That was the extent of our kind of opining on Davos at the time, and it was very common. Like, it wasn't this scary thing at all, but it's kind of become that after the scamdemic. But basically, um, these are just institutions of the kind of progressive order. So he's also one of the three initiators of a successful referendum campaign for a more direct electoral law, as well as a transparency law in his home city of Hamburg, which is one of Germany's 16 states. And he holds a degree in international relations and a master's degree in political sociology, both from the London School of Economics, which, like I always say, is kind of the Fabian University, or it was founded by Fabians anyway, and it's kind of associated with this kind of space, basically. And so, what have we seen here? Well, okay, what's this? This thing is associated with Ireland some way. So this kind of has me kind of thinking here. Okay, what's it got to do with Ireland? And so, in the research for this is where we get into the Irish dimension. This is going to be a long stream tonight. Sorry, but we have another little bit to do. But this is just all about Ireland, right? So here is the process by which Ireland joined, basically. Let me refresh this here. Oh, I can't get this really screen up. Sorry, so annoying. Okay, right. So here's how Ireland kind of comes into this whole thing, right? So this thing in Germany has this offshoot in Ireland, allegedly, and so I was interested in that. And in the research for the Open Government Partnership in Ireland, I had come across this guy and this institution called Active Citizen. And so the International Open Government Partnership was established in 2011. So that's the thing Obama created, basically, with Beth Simone Novak and all these guys in the Obama administration and the NGOs. And the prospect of Ireland joining the OGP gathered pace throughout 2012. The initiative was actively promoted in that year by Active Citizen Ireland, which corresponded with TDs and government representatives. During a Shannon debate on the Ombudsman Amendment Bill in September 2012, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, Brendan Howlin, and remember that ministry was created specifically to reform Irish politics after the Fine Gael Labour coalition government of 2011. So they came in, divided up the finance ministry into the finance ministry and this new ministry with Brendan Howlin, and he basically had a lot of power to kind of reform a lot of the structures of governance. So this is actually quite relevant because this open government partnership actually all of it basically comes out of that department. And so Howland then stated his department's intention to explore the potential for Ireland's participation in the OGP. OGP participation was subsequently recommended by Transparency International's country study addendum on Ireland's national integrity systems, published in October 2012. And then in December of 2012, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, Brendan Howland, announced Ireland's intention to explore and implement open government in his budgetary day speech. And so then in May 2013, Ireland committed formally to joining the Open Government Partnership. And there's a letter, it's all there. You can read all that if you want to find that website. But basically, since then, officials from Minister Howland's department have held several meetings with an ad hoc group of civil society representatives who have been keen to see the process evolve. These included this Active Citizen Organization, which I didn't know what that was, Task, which we'll explain, DOCUS, The Wheel, Transparency International, and Open Knowledge Foundation Ireland, as well as individuals. An Open Government Ireland Google group provided a space for civil society and citizens to nurture dialogue and keep the issue visible. And I don't remember any part of this happening in 2012 or 2013. I don't remember a single thing about this. And this kind of speaks to the nature of these initiatives. So this is an article which is basically all about how Ireland joined the OGP. And it opens up here and says, we caught up with Denis Parfanov and Martin Wallace, two of the lead initiators of the campaign for Ireland to join the Open Government Partnership. So then I'm like, okay, so these are the guys then who kind of drove the whole process. And they actually did. So Parfanov, he's an open knowledge ambassador for Ireland. So that's the Open Knowledge Foundation of Rufus Pollock, who got the National Democratic Institute Award, and who was involved in the international, open data kind of movement through the British government and everything. Parfanov is associated with his organization, or was associated with it anyway. And he says, my objective was to get the people of Ireland involved in the decisions that affect their lives. This was an opportunity to empower as many people as possible to be involved in the decisions affecting them. There is more to democracy than polling stations and voting every 5 years. When he found out about the Open Government Partnership, Parfanov took it upon himself to campaign for the Irish government to join. He saw the Open Government Partnership as an ideal vehicle for Ireland, able to accommodate a range of different areas that could increase openness, state accountability, and transparency in the decisions that affect citizens' lives. He quickly gathered a small group of interested individuals, including Martin Wallace, who met regularly to plan and strategize the campaign for Ireland to join the Open Government Partnership. And I have looked into the background. I've been trying to find out who these people are. And you can find jack shit about these people. Basically, the only one with any kind of profile that even still is Parfanov, and he doesn't seem to post very much of anything. So it was like these guys just came in, and within a few months were able to basically move Ireland into this thing, basically through their activism, and it's quite remarkable. And so they had all these different, groups and everything. Wallace points out that the political and economic backdrop meant citizens had lost faith in government. And I remember that time they had the global economic crash revealed poor policy making, poor political leadership, and deep-rooted economic problems in Ireland. The country lost its economic sovereignty in 2010. Irish banks were bailed out by the EU and the European Central Bank and the IMF due to poor decision-making by those in power. Ireland was in a political and economic crisis, and citizens felt disempowered, Wallace says. And they did. And these guys were able to really use this, So Parfanov says, my goal is to make information usable and useful. We want to empower people. We want information to be collective, for citizens to have access to information in useful formats. We want information to be published online in searchable, machine-readable, non-proprietary formats that are made available for reuse without restrictions. We want to empower people, or everyone, to make better informed decisions on a daily basis. For Parfanov and the initial ad hoc group, using social media tools smartly was an obvious approach to ensure those in power knew of the initiative, understood its value in the Irish context, and wanted Ireland to join its peers in the Open Government Partnership. The strategic application of social media tools differentiates the Irish campaign as a case study of good practice, rich in lessons for civil society players and in Open Government Partnership member states and those lobbying for their countries to join the Open Government Partnership. The incumbent Irish coalition government came into power with commitments to meaningful reforms to substantially increase state accountability to citizens and transparency in decision making. This meant a clear synergy in the manifestos of the political parties in government and the objectives of the Open Government Partnership. So you could say it was a perfect storm. And if you compare what these guys were able to achieve in a few months, basically with, like, for example, the anti-immigration movement in Ireland is being beaten off the streets, it's being harassed. There's entire think tanks in civil society have been constructed to basically construct dossiers on basically citizens. And the government, is is basically handing billions in public money to very shady offshore companies set up by questionable people. And none of this seems to raise a hackle. All these policies roll on, and apparently we live in an open government society. And yet these guys can come in and in a couple of months are able to basically turn Irish politics in a very specific direction. And that tells me that this is kind of like an inside job in a sense. There is a government who is amenable to this because they are influenced by American soft power. And that is why it was so successful. So the campaign did not stop at letter writing and social media tweets. Every possible forum was used to reach and engage political leaders and their advisors who had the clout to open doors. Parfanov attended public gatherings on open data, enterprise development, innovation, and digital agendas to create awareness and grow the Open Government Partnership lobby. He used a specific Twitter hashtag at these meetings to spread the word and promote the Open Government Partnership agenda. We asked a member of Parliament to find out what Ireland's open government plans were, And within a week, the question was raised in the national parliament, Wallace said. The ideas here was to raise awareness of the Open Government Partnership amongst our parliamentarians. Parfanov notes that the Irish parliamentarian Stephen Donnelly, that is Stephen McKinsey Donnelly, the Foreign Minister for Health, played a particularly helpful behind the scenes role in linking the ad hoc group with the appropriate government players. Yay! So you had the right people in government and you had the right people knocking on the door, basically. Open Government Partnership board members were linked up with the Irish OGP activists, and conference calls were placed connecting them with the UK Cabinet Office and the US State Department. So the US and British governments are basically encouraging Ireland to join this thing. Okay, they're advising the activists how to kind of make it happen, and it's no wonder that in a few months it did happen. Discussions were also held with Croatian and Moldovan counterparts who had valuable insights to share. The conference calls served as an opportunity to share experiences and how-to strategies. We were particularly keen to learn from those who had come before us, says Wallace. He credits support from the UK co-chair, the Open Government Partnership Civil Society Coordinator, and advice from member countries, CSOs, and government representatives for bringing Ireland to the point of joining the OGP. Without their advice, perspectives, and direction, we wouldn't be here. We looked to those ahead of us to learn from their experiences of what worked and what didn't work. We adapted best practices from other country experiences to our local environment. In the UK, the Open Government Partnership is housed in the Cabinet Office. In the US, it's in the State Department because it's soft power. This is soft power. This is American and British foreign policy, basically. And it's been extended in our country because we are amenable to their soft power. We learned from other countries that housing it within a Department of Foreign Affairs did not help to forward the OGP agenda sufficiently. So, in June 2012, after much persistence, the ad hoc group was connected to the Department of Jobs, Enterprise and Innovation. However, Minister Sean Sherlock of the Labour Party felt that the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform was a better fit to take the lead on OGP, and that's because that was the department which was created specifically after the Fine Gael Labour coalition government basically came in to basically reform Irish economics and society, basically. And so the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform houses complementary initiatives, including ethics reforms towards accountability and transparency for public office bearers, new laws to protect whistleblowers, regulate lobbyists, and reform freedom of information laws. Meetings with civil senior advisors to the Cabinet Minister, Brendan Howlin, and other senior officials ensued. So again, we're seeing here, this is the Labour Party has played a huge role, and progressives like Stephen Donnelly, who again is former McKinsey, these guys are basically professional social change agents in that sense. They are very much, this is their logic, this is how they think. So it's no surprise that they would kind of take the lead on this. And within a few months, this is all passed. It took 11 months to find the right people. Once found, things moved along well, and they were open to the idea. At present, everything proposed to government requires a business case. So we made a business case for OGP. We had to explain the economic benefits of OGP, the stimulus open data can provide, the efficiencies open data can yield. It was important to stress the improvement to global perceptions, i.e. soft power, which an ambitious open government program would bring due to its knock-on economic benefits. Wallace said, of course, the non-economic advantages the OGP brings were also communicated, he adds. At meetings with senior civil servants, including William Busang of that Department of Reform, it became clear that while officials were in principle positively disposed towards the OGP, they needed input to build a strong narrative in support of Irish membership. So they did that. They did that basically, and so in December 2012, then Minister Brendan Howlin then announced in the budget speech that it recommended that Ireland join the OGP in May 2013. A letter was sent from Howlin to the co-chairs, and the rest is history. So at that point, then civil society groups, including Transparency International Ireland, began to see the appeal, and then civil society got on board, and of course, then the juggernaut is off, And once the juggernaut is running, I'm not going to go into all this stuff now, but another time, next time, I'm going to talk about all the NGOs and everything and how they kind of function. But once that was kind of done, there was no doubt it was going to happen. So Yeah, I've got loads of resources. I'm not going to share all these actually because I don't want to get into it. But basically, they had all these resources are online. You can read all these resources basically. Yeah, I'm not going into all that, but you can read all the communications. A lot of that stuff is actually available online. And what I want to get to is this. Well, who is this guy Parfenov? I've never heard of this guy. And so this brings us then to looking at his biography, because he actually is the one who's done more than anyone, and it's very clear he's credited by everyone along with kind of making this happen. So this is the guy here. And Denis Parfenov is a highly educated professional with a diverse academic background. He holds a master's in international relations from DCU and a master's in international business from University College Dublin. Denis also studied project management at the School of Food and Nutritional Sciences, a bachelor's in international economic relations at the Institute of Management and Entrepreneurship, a doctorate in philosophy from the Belarusian Academy of Science, and a bachelor of law from the Belarusian State University. So I can't even work out whether this guy is Irish or not. I don't. It's not clear. It's not clear there's not very much about the guy anywhere. But this guy drove the whole process. And it gets more interesting. So he is the founder and director of this thing called Active Citizen, which is the NGO which basically was set up to bring Ireland into the Open Government Partnership, a politically neutral, citizen-centred Irish nonprofit which advocates the use of open source technology for civil engagement and government transparency. He holds it. Yeah, this is repeating the bio here. So during the 2011 Irish election, so there's another little nugget here. During the 2011 Irish general election, Denis assisted in the rollout of candidatewatch.ie, an Irish sister project of parliamentwatch.org. He has initiated and is currently coordinating a civil campaign to encourage Ireland to join the OGP. So this is an old bio from like 2012. And so I was going, okay, I remember this Parliament Watch. We came across this Parliament Watch when a few minutes ago we were talking about the NDI awarding this German chap award. So this is the guy who created Parliament Watch, and here he is getting an award from the National Democratic Institute, recognizing the diversity of civic innovation in 2013. So he created Parliament Watch in Germany, and he's a social entrepreneur and all the rest of it. And the guy who got the Open Government Partnership kind of passed in Ireland to join it, he is assisting in the rollout of the Irish Sister Project. Now, it's not only that, actually. There's actually more. So there's other little links here, little nuggets we can extract. So on top of that, so we've connected them to Parliament Watch. There's his bio from his website, archived. And there's a load of stuff there. I won't go into all that now, but there's his company. He has a company called Kubrick Engineering. So at Kubrick Engineering, we design, develop, and deploy secure and reliably distributed data infrastructures which are driven by trusted and tested open source technologies. We help to keep personal data private and secure, and we ensure public data is open and authentic. So I don't know anything about that company. I was just doing a dig. Here is the he's kind of running this campaign, but he established and ran this campaign, and he's written the letter. He's putting pressure on Howland and everything to keep him kind of going, which won't open. But anyway, and the other kind of thing is the Open Knowledge Foundation. So, Open Knowledge Foundation Ireland. He actually here he is on this. He is turning government data into gold. We are sitting on a resource that has a potential market worth tens of billions of euro that could stimulate new innovations and that could increase the transparency and governance in public life. That resource is government data, and it is worth more when it is given away. Every minute of the day, we produce 100,000 tweets, send 204,000 emails, upload 48 hours of new video on YouTube, and Google receives, it's probably way more than that now, actually. I'd imagine it's multiples of that now. We generate data by using our phones and computers, public and private services. Data is all around us. We believe that data should be seen as a component of an effort to build a public digital infrastructure where people could, within the law, do whatever they want. It should be put to use and empower all of us to make more better informed decisions on a daily basis. Data becomes open data when it can be freely used, reused, and distributed by anyone who wants to explore it, share it, or build something new with it. So I can see a kind of a huge economic case in this too, in that all this data being made public can actually be very useful to certain interests as well. But regardless, he is associated with this. He is the with the Open Knowledge Foundation. So that's the institution created by Rufus Pollock, which in 2013 also received an NDI Democracy Award recognizing the diversity of civic innovation. So this is getting really interesting. So this brings us then. So he's affiliated with this Open Knowledge Foundation, and of course there's Open Knowledge Ireland basically. So Ireland joined the Open Knowledge Network in May 2013, and here's the members, and it includes all these guys. You have this guy Adrian Cork. Again, I haven't actually looked into all these guys. Alexander Bourgeois, Dennis Parfanov is there. So Dennis Parfanov is a civic entrepreneur, founder of the Open Knowledge Ireland, and ambassador for Open Knowledge. So he's an ambassador for the Open Knowledge Foundation, and he is the founder of Open Knowledge Ireland. And he worked with the rollout of Candidate Watch, basically, which is part of Parliament Watch in Germany. And both of those initiatives received the congratulations or award from the NDI as part of their kind of soft power kind of strategy. So I just found this really interesting to kind of work out who are these guys, like, what motivates these guys to get involved, and look how successful their campaign was. He organizes fora and runs regular Open Data Ireland events with a view to developing Ireland's public data infrastructure and influencing policy at the highest political level. Dennis initiated, planned, and successfully executed a civic campaign which resulted in the Irish government's commitment to the Open Government Partnership. He has actively participated in the co-creation of the first Irish OGP national plan, which led to Ireland becoming a full member in July 2014. Dennis is a member of the Open Data Governance Board and a founder of Cubic Engineering, which builds persistent and secure distributed data infrastructures. And then there's the other members of this. They all seem to be foreign. I don't know who any of these guys are. Flora Fleischer, Ingo Keck. Who are these guys? Who are these people? Salua Nasabe. I don't know who these guys are. Sean Day. Don't know who that is. A lecturer at UCC. I haven't looked into all these guys. There's only so many hours in the day. And there's another, it sounds like a Japanese name. Yeah, Japanese name. But I thought that was interesting. I'm wondering, like, what is this campaign? Who are these guys? What is this campaign about? Yeah, and that's just to confirm that we are talking about the same institution created by Rufus Pollock, basically. So this active citizen organization that Parfanov created, this is the kind of list of people that I could find associated with it. And none of these accounts are active, basically. I couldn't find jack shit about any of these people, really. It was like they just popped up. A few of them, one or two of them, post somewhat within a couple of years now, but most of them haven't been active for like 10 years, which is kind of funny. I just don't know what motivated people to get involved in this because they don't seem to be very active anymore. And so then there's the Candidate Watch thing, which he also did. And so this is a cooperative partnership. So Parfanov helped in the rollout of this. And this is just confirming what Candidate Watch is in Ireland. It is a cooperative partnership between the German non-profit organization Parliament Watch, which is created by that German dude we talked about getting the award, and Task, the Irish think tank for action on social change. Candidate Watch originated in Germany, where since 2005, blah blah blah, all these questions have been asked. Cool. And so you may be familiar with Task. This is an independent think tank whose mission is to address inequality and sustain democracy by translating analysis into action. And I have here the brief background of Task because it's another leftist kind of progressive institution that was here's a history of it. So in the late 1990s, a number of people began to put in place the necessary building blocks to create the first ever independent think tank in Ireland. When Task was established in 2001, think tanks of any kind were a rarity in Ireland, and more generally. So this is the first really powerful. I would call it like leftist or kind of public service kind of think tank. Um, and more generally, there were few alternatives to neoliberal discourse in the public square. They love to use the term neoliberal. At the time, policy making tended to be reactive, a largely technocratic managerial concern rather than a political one, strongly influenced by the institution of social partnership and the powerful vested interests, wealthy individuals, and elite groups. And so, largely driven by the global influence of the economic right, strong neoliberal orthodoxies shaped the thinking of. I don't think neoliberalism is particularly right wing either, to be fair. I have a different analysis of what neoliberal politics is, which sometime I might cover. Um, but anyway, this is where Task kind of stepped in. It was going to provide a more left wing kind of alternative to that neoliberal type thing. Following a planning period into June 2001, Task was formally incorporated as a not for profit limited company. The original name for Task was the Foundation for Policy Alternatives. In 2002, it changed to Task, a think tank for action on social change. So it's all about social change, or you might say social innovation, because this is very much in keeping with the thinking of Jeff Mulligan and the progressive New Labour uh, and New Democrat in America type way of thinking. It's not really communistic or anything, it's more progressive. And so they list the people here who are involved. Three non-executive directors chaired by Des Gerety with Professor John Horgan and John Curran, a steering committee comprised by the three board directors together with Fintan O'Toole, the Irish Times, the famous liberal who chaired the advisory council to Task. Around 20 people drawn from political and policy sectors, including trade unions, NGOs, and academics. So this is the perfect example of a progressive think tank, basically. And they're really good at this. NGOs like this. My two co-founders were Proncius de Rossa. He was the former Sticky, part of the Workers' Party, and Jim O'Donnell and myself met regularly for the first 5 or 6 years of Task's existence, basically, where they developed it all. By 2003, Task brought out its first publication, After the Ball, a searing analysis of Irish society by Fintan O'Toole. A step change occurred in 2008 when the Atlantic Philanthropies, who, along with the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust, funded much of our work on democracy over the years, provided us with a grant to cover our core costs for a 5-year period, a grant which was renewed for 3 further terms of 3 years, taking the organisation to the end of 2019. With this funding, Task was able to put in place a more sophisticated structure of policy staff, along with much enhanced communications, funding, governance, and administration, i.e., just as Chuck Feeney and these guys were coming in, basically creating out of thin air this powerful LGBT movement. Task is another one of these institutions which gets pumped up, and it is driving that kind of Anglo-American progressive type politics, and it's central to these developments that we're now talking about, such as the Open Government Partnership, which is very clearly an instrument of American soft power in Ireland. Yeah, so it just goes on and on about all their contributions, basically. I won't go into all that, but that's what Task is. And so Task and this German think tank, which is awarded by the NDI, set up Candidate Watch in Ireland, and Dennis Parfanov basically helps roll it out. And he's also connected with the Open Knowledge Foundation of Rufus Pollock, which also got an NDI award. I find that interesting, to say the least. And here's the website of that German NGO, actually. So the final thing I wanted to point out, another of the things that came out of Ireland joining the Open Government Partnership was this Open Data Governance Board, which I believe still exists. I haven't investigated this in any serious way, but you can actually see Parfenov is photographed here. So this is November 2015, and you have the inaugural meeting of the Open Data Governance Board was held in Dublin on Tuesday, the 24th of November 2015. Board members were delighted that the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, Brendan Howlin, was able to join them to outline his views on the importance of open data as a key element of the Irish government's reform agenda. Head of the Open Data Unit, then Evelyn O'Connor, provided a comprehensive background briefing and all the rest of it. And so they're all there, and these are all influential people, actually. I won't go into it now. I'd like to do another stream on this because this leads us into areas and other institutions that I don't want to get into now because we've done enough for tonight. But it'll lead you into Science Foundation Ireland, for example. That's involved in this board. There's units all over the country basically managing data, and I'd like to maybe talk about that another time. Yeah, so Insight is one of the Science Foundation Ireland, one of Europe's largest data analytics research organizations. So data is important. Data is a source of power, and I'll just briefly touch on Howland's role, actually, because again, if you obviously know he is the Labour Party, and he's talking there after he's left politics, basically, and he's basically talking about the pressure they were under to get the country moving again. And you actually find out that Howland began his career as a primary school teacher, and he was involved in the anti-nuclear power station thing in Carnsore Point in the 70s. This early activism would continue, and under Labour leader Ivana Bacik credits Howland with campaigning on progressive issues like marriage equality and abortion rights long before they were popular, all of which are powerful American soft power things as well, by the way. Howland first sought election to the Dáil in 1982, but unsuccessful, and he got appointed to the Shannon, where he shared an office with future presidents Mary Robinson and Michael D. Higgins. Howland's one of these guys that flies under the radar. I do believe he was actually at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992 in some capacity. I came across that years ago, researching more things. But regardless, he is someone who is very much of this kind of mind. He is very much a progressive, and that's why I wanted to point this out. And so he had a big role. This is another aspect of the kind of Labour Party and kind of understanding what the Labour Party actually represents. They actually represent an American progressive type of politics. It's not they are different than maybe the kind of people before profits, kind of communist types. They are not the same thing at all. And so this is kind of just showing you where we've kind of come tonight. We've gone through this British and American kind of movement, this open data, open government kind of thing, which got codified into American soft power foreign policy in the Obama era, and which basically ended up influencing things in Ireland. And which is not on this map. It should be on this map, but it's not there. Ooh, lad. Is this the one? Yeah, so this is the thing I wanted to show you. Yeah. So this map here kind of gives you the three core branches. So you have the branch one, which is the key institutions and individuals driving the broader open government, open data movement, which is kind of chronological milestones, US, UK focus with global ties. We've gone through Tom Steinberg, Rufus Pollock, Jeff Mulligan, Sunlight Foundation, the Sebastopol meeting, and where all these principles of open government data were hammered out. MIT Media Lab is central to it. Jeff Mulligan was there. Uh, um, Novak was there. She founded the government lab. There's all this collaboration with Mulligan and Pollock and all these guys. And then you have the second kind of key members and contributors to the creation of the actual open government partnership process. Then, and you end up with the thing that happened in the UN and everything, and it's all U.S. foreign policy. Obama, Samantha Power, Simone Novak, and that's then it is internationalized through the UN, and it's brought into Ireland, basically. So branch 3 is here, the coalition that prepared Ireland's Open Government Partnership membership to 2011 to 2014, following Denis Parfanov's campaign. And you have the government. So in particular, the government responders that are described here was Brendan Howlin, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform. He responded to the campaign very positively, and the department that he led was actually charged with specifically, developing or reforming Ireland. So American soft power has had a huge part in reforming and restructuring our society. And so the organizations then you had Transparency International, Task on Tashka, Digital Rights Ireland, Open Knowledge Ireland. Parfanov's involved in that, and he's involved in active citizenship and the Open Government Ireland network. And then, of course, these are Wallace and Parfanov in particular. Don't see much about Wallace, and I can't find much social media presence or anything. He seems to have disappeared. The joint working group then, and this is where all these guys got together basically then, and this all fed into the National Action Plan. So in the next stream I'm going to explain what came out of all of this. We're going to talk about all these other NGOs at that point. So now we can get into more interesting stuff, because this is kind of hard work. I understand this is not easy to listen to, Thanks for bearing, thanks for hanging in here with me, because this is not easy to research this shit, This takes a lot of time to research these kinds of subjects. But broadly speaking, the themes of soft power are central to all of this. And in the next stream, we're going to look into this stuff here: the Wheel, Digital Rights Ireland, Task, Change Agency, which I don't know much about yet, Innovative Communities, Irish Rural Link. That kind of brings the rural kind of Ireland dimension in. So this is if you live in rural Ireland, this is how you would interface with this structure, right? So the Open Government Partnership is basically 50-50 state and public sector. And so these are the institutions that kind of rotate on the civil society roundtable for the Open Government Partnership in Ireland. And this is how you get your voice heard, right? Now, most of these institutions are hardcore progressive. The Wheel certainly is. I would say Digital Rights Ireland is a bit more balanced. Task is very clearly a progressive think tank ran by mainly a trade union and left-wing progressive politicians. Change Agency is absolutely in the area of social innovation. And then Innovative Communities, that's social innovation. Again, think Jeff Mulligan. And then Irish Rural Link, that's kind of bringing rural Ireland in. But again, it's very progressive. So we're going to leave it at that. I'm not going to any further on that one. But that'll be where we're going to go on the next stream. I'll try to do that maybe after Christmas, maybe in between Christmas and New Year's. I'll just have a look at the chat here now while I'm here, because we've been going in 2.5 hours. See a few lads. Thanks for showing up. Connecting the dots. Yeah, absolutely. Fianna Fact has said before that the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, but especially under Pascal, changed a huge amount in this country. This is just adding to that case. I absolutely agree. Now, I haven't investigated. I think Fianna Fact is doing amazing research. I'm interested. I'd love to have him on to talk about some of that if he wants to do that. I'd absolutely love to do it, because I think the more we collaborate and kind of pool the research together and have conversations about it, you can actually reach people in a way which is very hard. When I'm just talking here kind of on my own, I'm having to kind of hold down a lot of things and pull a lot of different things together and try and make it interesting. It's much more interesting when you have a conversation with someone. So I'd love to dig into that, and I bet he has a lot of interest in research, because I have seen this with like things to do with immigration and everything. Uh, you know, I've seen how certain departments, when they get activists in them, they kind of ramp up. They ramp up their power, and they become very effective. And you saw that with, for example, when Joe O'Brien and when uh, uh, the Green Party guy, what's his name? Green, Joe O'Brien and oh, I can't think of his name. When they got into those ministries to do with immigration, they just went for it, and they effectively set a pattern which now continues. And these new ministers who come in basically repeat that pattern, because they're not as motivated as these guys are. But when Joe O'Brien and the Green Party guy, my God, I can't think of his name. Can someone think of the Green Party guy's name? Hang on, let me see what his name is. Roderick O'Gorman, that's the one. Roderick O'Gorman. When Roderick O'Gorman and Joe O'Brien came in, they basically revolutionized the departments that they came into. And I was looking at what Joe O'Brien and all was doing with Rethink Ireland and everything, and now he's at the ICCL. Like, that's not a demotion. Like, he is just being moved because he is a very effective change agent. He is a very effective Jeff Mulligan type character. He knows exactly how to hurt nationalists, how to stop people from that they don't want taking part in this process. Basically, he knows how to stop you from doing that. And this is, in my opinion, this is the most important thing to do with politics in this country, is all this kind of stuff. This is the work that has to be done. There's a body of work that has to be done here. And if it's not done, we're not going to win, basically, because you're going to be played off the field at every level. If you want to talk about the immigration stuff, this structure is certainly, when you talk about this kind of structure, the PPNs and everything, this is what you're going to run up against when you want to deal in your local community with an IPAS center. If you want to talk about what's going on at the local level, you're going to have to deal with these structures. I've got streams I can do on all this stuff eventually, but we're just we're going to pick our teams as we go along. This next stream will be all about this, and then we'll probably shift gears a little bit, maybe into another essay I have done, and but I'll try to do a stream every couple of weeks, basically, and keep it going with this, and pick something interesting. If not, we'll get a guest or whatever. And I think I've kept you enough. So thanks for listening. If you want to follow me, the links are in the description. I'd appreciate it if you would like the video on whatever format, whatever. If you could go over to Odyssey and follow me over there, and Rumble. I'll upload everything to Rumble and Odyssey, basically. If I can't stream to Rumble still, we're gonna try and get Rumble going, but it just doesn't let me stream because the channel is not verified for some reason. It just won't let me verify it. And basically, if you guys could just follow me on Substack, support me by doing that. Just make the effort to make accounts on these fora, like the streams or whatever, share them around. A lot of work goes into producing this kind of material. I don't want money from you, but if you could just share it and support me that way, I would appreciate it. I will be back in a few weeks. We'll have a stream. I'll also have a new article. I'm not going to release it over Christmas, but that'll be really interesting stuff. And until then, take care.